spite of all our communication technology, no invention is as effective as the sound of the human voice. When we hear the human voice, we instinctively want to listen in the hopes of understanding it, even when the speaker is searching for the right words to say. That's because the human voice resonates differently from everything else in the world. This is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. Listen in on candid conversations with creative entrepreneurs and insanely interesting people.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Unmistakable Creative Backstage. I am here with my co-host, Greg Hartle, who is back from his mini sick leave. So how are you doing, Greg?
Much better. Yeah. So last week we had to cancel, or I had to cancel, because I really thought I was on the verge of death by cough. So yeah, this week feeling much better. In fact, just overall, just feeling much. This is probably the best. Today is probably the best I've felt since October of last year.
Wow.
Which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So yeah, I'm feeling good, ready to roll. Let's do this.
All right, awesome. Well, it's good to have you back. I'm sure that people even asked, wrote in and said, "Hey, is Greg okay?" So, good to know that everybody cares about you.
Yeah, so I really do appreciate that, and I've learned a lot about that lately, and I've actually had a few moments of awareness that people have pointed that out to me, and it actually was triggered by you when I wasn't responding to you. You went as far as calling my doctor, and then when I finally did respond to you, I remember you said. You said, well, the last time I lost track of you, you ended up contacting me from the hospital. So I was concerned. So, but what was interesting about that is, I was talking to a couple of friends on two different occasions, and I was like, yeah, people are like trying to track me down. Cause I had a really bad spell there where I didn't answer to anybody. I was just out cold, and not moving from bed. So basically, I missed every appointment, and I didn't respond to anybody's emails or text messages I didn't even see them. I didn't check my phone or anything. Like, I was done, And but when I talked to a couple of friends about it, they were like, "Well, isn't that cool that you have that many people in your life that love you?" And I was like, "Whoa, that's kind of a big deal." So it was a good awareness for me. So yeah, I appreciate all the support from all the listeners too.
Cool. Well, let's speaking of listeners, let's get into their feedback a little bit on our debate about feeding the ecosystem, which was the first time we actually disagreed on the air, which was kind of entertaining. So this actually comes from Michael in Israel. He says, Greg, if you play back the podcast, I think you left out one important thing. No artist, even one widely acknowledged as exceptional, is owed a living. Even so, any creator is owed his asking price from people who take his original work. Downloading/taking without paying the price is theft. It's interesting because he had a whole other thing about, the laws around all of this and piracy laws in Israel. What do you think about that, Greg?
Actually, I think I'm in agreement. I absolutely agree with that. And I think that was, I think a lot of times it's more about clarity around what the actual argument is or position is, because I'm of the position that every artist should be paid what they're worth if they're operating under a capitalist system and a market system and they want to participate in that. I absolutely think that. I've actually never pirated anything in my entire life, and I'm fully happy to pay for everything and have and always will. And so I'm in agreement with that. My position was that if no one paid for your art, as an artist, you will still create. Mm-hmm. And if I understood you correctly, Srini, you made the claim that if no one pays for your art, you can't continue to make art. And I was just saying that I think artists will always create. It's just born into them, and it's part of their nature. So whether they participate in a marketplace or not, whether anyone buys for them or not, they will not stop creating. And that was really the point I was making.
Yeah, it's interesting because that makes a perfect setup for Charisse. She wrote it and she said, free art ain't going nowhere, but what's going to happen is that creatives will become more skilled entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs will create new business services designed to help creatives make money with their art.
She's spot on, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty solid. Let's see, who else do we got here? Amber wrote in and she said, we need to go further and talk about what artists put into the world and the idea of value, and value being money, but also so much more. Mm-hmm. For example, the people that listen to your podcasts are oftentimes inspired to go and create something of value themselves, and that can keep trickling down the line and likely, to return to you at some point in a monetary way or in another form of value. And that's from Amber. And I actually really like that feedback, because I was talking to somebody today about what it is that we do here, and this is something that really I've learned from you as well when we talked about 10lap, is sort of the ripple effect of a project. And I think that's what she's talking about. Thousands of people around the world here listen. And my hope is that, whoever is changed as a byproduct of this, they go out and they change other people's lives. And so there's it continues. It's the legacy of it. The ripple lives on after I'm gone, is the idea.
Yeah, and that's a form of currency that inspires people to create, right? So that is, in fact, a form of payment. I spent 3 years of my life, the last 3 years, not making a dollar from the individuals that I worked with, So, I if you added up the hours, it's quite a lot. In spending my personal time in the last 3 years helping people with their ideas and helping people create, and all the creations I did in the last 3 years, I didn't charge a single dollar for, and I was perfectly happy with that. And that's kind of, I guess, why I had that position 2 weeks ago anyway, was that, no one paid me a single dollar, and yet I could not have been more happy to continue to create. And because the form of currency for me was watching them create as a result, and watching them experience the things that they want to experience. And that's, that level of fulfillment. Now, that's not to say that we all don't have to pay our bills in some respects. And, there's a lot of people that want to create art to get paid for it, but there's also more than one form of way of getting paid for it.
Mm-hmm. So here's one last piece of listener feedback, and this is from Allison, and it's interesting because she's bringing up our Renaissance person conversation. Among creatives and entrepreneurs, I see this shift happening where craft is being framed around a problem to be solved. Often this looks like a collection of skills combined with expertise, perspective, and or purpose. I do believe that the future is a modern version of the Renaissance man/lady. We're just a little bit ahead of our times. The challenge with that, of course, is that society is not currently designed for a Renaissance approach. Which that's actually a pretty interesting observation.
No, and it's a very sophisticated one, and there's a lot of deep angles there. But I would tend to agree with that, and I think it's it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think over the next 10 years as we kind of unfold here with the adoption of technology and the breakdown of barriers and the ability to create from scratch. Will only continue to improve, and more people will have access to it, and we'll see the result of the ability to switch gears, to change careers, to move into other endeavors more quickly and start things more often, and we'll see what the consequences of that are. Will that create more opportunity, or will that create just more generic stuff? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that, speaking of technology, that makes a perfect setup to talk about what we want to get into today, which is something that's been on my mind quite a bit lately as I've become obsessed with pen and paper and my moleskins, and freaking out when I leave them somewhere. It's I nearly had a breakdown because I left a moleskin at our venue for our event, and luckily the guy had it there when I went back the other day. But I wrote an article on Medium titled "The Virtues of Pen and Paper," which was basically a case for going analog in a digital world. And I've sort of come to the conclusion that technology is amazing. I've always said the gap between creativity and technology is narrower than it's ever been, and it's giving us all these opportunities. And yet, the more, I go down this path, and the more I create work and the more I write, the more I am starting to see that there may be a diminishing return to technology as a tool to facilitate creativity. I think that there's a certain point at which it actually starts to hinder our creativity. I got to the point a few weeks ago where I was with a friend and I had to delete all the email apps from my phone, and it took about 3 days to reduce my anxiety level back to like a normal standard thing. Like, I had probably pressed the button 10 times because I was so worried about what was going on in my inbox. I mean, and that's kind of an aside, but I think that of course, when your mind is filled with that, how can you be creative? And yet when I sit down at a blank page in the morning, I think I've mentioned, I have a whole new ritual now where I set this room up, the room that I'm in right now, like an operating room, like a surgeon sets up his room the day before an operation. I come in here, and the first thing I do before I go to sleep at night is I make sure there's not a single piece of technology in this room. And all that's in here is pen and paper and books. And, I am finding this to be much more therapeutic as a creative process. And I'm finding that I'm much more creative, and I'm having more insights than I've ever had. And, I think I'm hearing the sound of my own voice in a very different way than I ever have.
Yeah. My position on technology just in general. I mean, I'm still a book reader, and I don't check email. I check email, I don't know, once a day maximum. I could care less about my phone. So for me personally, technology is just not that interesting from that perspective in my day-to-day life. Yet, the first business I ever built was the first business I ever founded was a telecommunications company, and I own 3 technology-driven companies right now. I'm part of the development team of 2 different apps, and so it's not that I don't like technology; it's that for me personally, I don't leverage it to that degree. From a social network standpoint, it's been quite some time since I've updated any sort of social network other than if it's specific to a project or business. Mm-hmm. So, that's just my general opinion, for me personally. But I think in the bigger sense, what you're saying here, it's not just technology, it applies to everything in life, which is there's always a point of diminishing returns. I mean, exercise is no different. Focusing on your, diet and nutrition is no different. When you become obsessive about something, it's usually not healthy. It moves beyond the level of healthiness. It's just that technology, by and large, has habit building aspects to it on purpose. Mm-hmm. So, look, computer programmers are not stupid people. These are incredibly intelligent individuals who study the science behind it. And we do too in my businesses that are technology focused. I mean, we study habit loops and habit patterns. We want you to develop the habit to continuously come back. Mm-hmm. That's how our business survives. So that is no different than any sort of social network or any sort of app or anything else. If it's done well, it's done to make you addicted to it. Mm-hmm. So that part, is a serious aspect of it. There's a lot of science behind that. And what happens is, of course, you become addicted to it, and it becomes to start to control you instead of you it. And that's what you're seeing personally play out in your life is you were being controlled by those technologies, and now you're starting to take that control back. And through that process, you're freeing up the psychic energy within yourself to, instead of being controlled, instead of having that psychic energy be controlled by it, you are controlling that psychic energy and leveraging it and facilitating where that energy goes now. And that energy happens for you to be put into your writing and other creative endeavors, which is causing you to produce better work.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's no question. I think that you're right about the addictive nature of these things. I mean, even I think there's been a lot of work done around sort of how a reward center in the brain works, right? And like even something as simple as getting a like on Facebook produces a dopamine rush of some sort.
Yeah.
It's weird, and so it just becomes addictive, or getting messages from somebody. And yet, I think that what is happening here is that the noise of all of that just starts to fill our lives, and it gets to a point like it's great when you start out because it's like, hey, cool, I can share all this stuff, I can put it out into the world, and then next thing you know, like you said, it starts to control you instead of you controlling it,
use those. I mean, like anything, you have to use those tools to serve you, not sabotage you. I mean, a knife can be used to spread butter on a piece of bread, or it can be used to kill someone. Right. So it's a tool. It's how you personally use that tool that matters most. And so I don't think that it's technology's fault. Mm-hmm. I don't think that it's the app's fault. I don't think it's the app developer's fault. I think it's our responsibility as a citizen of that technology to use it in a way that serves us, not sabotages us. Now, that's not easy. That's real easy for me to say. That's not easy to do, right? So you have to be aware of that. You have to do things like go on digital detoxes. You have to do, put in systems and other things in place, or like in your case, delete apps from your phone or whatever on occasion. But, it doesn't mean you have to swing from one side to the other. There's a happy medium in there as well. I mean, there's times to use technology and there's times not to use technology, that serves you. But I think what's fascinating to me is it's all about clutter in my mind. It's all about clutter of the mind. And when you free up that energy to be used for your creativity, it's amazing what you can create. But it's very hard to free up that energy when you have so many things coming at you and so many distractions in your way. You don't have the opportunity to free up that energy, which is why me personally, that's why I don't adopt a lot of technologies that other people do. It's not that I don't know about them. It's not that I don't appreciate them. It's not that I don't leverage them in business. But I just personally don't do that so that I can keep my mind clear as often as possible.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. It's funny because like I've noticed for sure, like when you start to delete stuff and you start to clear clutter. I mean, even if you listen to our guest from earlier this week, Stephen Kotler, who talked about the neuroscience of flow. And, when he got really sick with Lyme disease, I said, what is the secret to, he said, really it comes down to narrowing everything down to the 4 or 5 most important things in your life and doing only those things. He said, you'll be amazed what happens in your life when you're willing to do that. And it's funny. I love that you said there's a happy medium, because earlier today, when I knew we were going to talk about this, I was doing research on Ted Kaczynski. And I was like, so, basically you're saying there's a happy medium. What Greg is saying is you don't need to become the next Unabomber. And that's not what we're advocating here. But it was really interesting to read that and think, I wonder what, like, apparently he wrote a manifesto. I'm very curious about this guy's work now. I mean, I think he took it to an extreme and he was insane. But to me, there's something. I think it's a bit strange that we have reached a point where we need a digital detox. Like that worries me. I think we're playing with dangerous territory.
No, see, I disagree. See, I think that's what we're so short-sighted, that's what tends to happen, right? So in my opinion, I think if you need a digital detox, it's not a problem. Just, it's a digital detox. And I don't think that's any different than needing a body detox. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're running rampant all the time and you're in in an environment that's filled with toxins and other things, your body needs a detox. It's you don't not live in New York City because or LA because it has pollution. You just do the things you need to do to live in LA and still have a thriving body and still have a thriving mind. Like, I think that we tend to take such extreme we think of those things as extremes instead of those things as just a part of life. So a part of life is to take a digital detox. It's not a, oh my God, I'm desperate, I have to take a digital detox. It's build that into your life.
Yeah.
And then it's not a big deal. And see, I think that's what happens is we become so short-sighted and we think things have to be drastic like that instead of just that's a part of life. A part of life is we're digitally connected all the time. So another part of life is take breaks from it. And really, it can be quite that simple.
Yeah, well, now that you've put it that way, as you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, you know what? The detox doesn't have to be the detox camp that they have. It's make this a part of your daily life.
Yeah.
And it's true. I mean, I've started taking long walks, and as I was thinking about this, I thought, this is something I need to do daily. I really should just do this daily. I think that, I will tell you, the most creative time I have is the time when I am not connected to technology.
Yeah, that's because you're freeing up that psychic energy. And that's been the case for myself as well. So every day I sit in a dark room by myself doing nothing. And that room, has no technology in it or nothing on. And that makes a huge difference for me in terms of my creativity. And so I just build that in. It's not a big deal. I don't need to make it a big deal like, oh my God, I have to do this. It's just a part of my life. And that's the difference, I think, because once it becomes just part of your routine and part of your life, then it doesn't reach those levels of extreme that you were talking about earlier, where if you delete an app from your phone, you can't handle yourself, and you want to check it all the time. And it's about managing that and controlling that so it doesn't control you.
Yeah, I think that you'll get to a certain point where you realize that, okay, you know what, I need to do something about this. And I think that you're right. I mean, I think that once you get into the routine, it just becomes part of your daily life. It's, I think that it was Dani Shapiro, who we had here a while back, that, convinced me of the virtues. I remember I asked her about this idea of, in her book, she says, fill your ears with the music of good sentences. And I said, so how do you suggest I do that? And she said, by not starting the day in front of the computer.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's actually quite profound. So, and that was that for me, that was the case for getting back to reading physical books again. Like now I'm actually getting books in the mail and I'm realizing this is actually kind of nice. You read slower. And even when you write by hand, like you write slower. Like I think there's something very different about the way you slow down in these processes.
Well, I think from just a personal observation on my end. By the way, I'm really curious to hear what the listeners have to think of this. If we've reached an extreme level of digital connection that it's actually hurting our creativity and hurting our processes, or if people think it's no big deal, or I'm curious to know what the listeners think. If all of us need to go on a massive digital detox boot camp or whatever.
Well, then nobody would be listening, Greg. If we did that, that'd be a problem.
Yeah, I know. So don't go that extreme. Then we couldn't pay our bills. But no, I'm really curious because this is a topic. This has obviously been a topic of conversation over the last couple of years, especially with the adoption rate of social media and social networks. But I remember seeing a photo. Somebody posted a photo recently of a train car. It was like a commuter train, probably in New York City, on the way into Manhattan. And everybody had a newspaper up in front of their face and nobody was talking to each other, right? And so it was kind of like, 50 years ago version of today where everyone has their phone up to their face and no one's talking to each other. And that's what I mean is sometimes I think we get short-sighted about this. We act as if like we're so different today than we were 50 years ago when we're really not. Our behaviors are very much similar. We're just doing different things. Mm-hmm. But I'm curious to know what the listeners think. So write in unmistakablecreative.com/contact. Very, very interested in that. But a personal observation in you, Srini, is I think what's happening is allowing you to slow down a bit because you run at such a fast pace and your tempo is so quick. And I think that the digital technologies that you've been adopting over the recent years has actually accelerated that for you to the point where your mind has become noisy. Mm-hmm. And now you're adopting processes that slow that down. And through the process of slowing that down, you're starting to tap into different angles of your creativity that you weren't before.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty accurate observation. It's funny because as you were talking about this, for those of you guys who haven't seen our Facebook page, Sarah Steenland is doing some pretty clever illustrations that are like a social commentary on a lot of it. And I think one of the really funny ones is it's one of her basically sitting at the computer saying, "Oh my God, I got all this work done," and then she pretends to be like taking a break, and 10 minutes later she's back at her laptop.
Yeah. No, those drawings are great, by the way. I mean, that Facebook page is starting to get pretty fun and clever, with all those pictures. But yeah, I mean, look, technology is here to stay. We know that for sure. And it's only going to be a bigger part of our lives. And so the question becomes is, what do we do about it? How do we make sure that we can tap into our creative energy? How do we make sure that our mind doesn't become so cluttered that we're not producing and instead we're just consuming? It's an interesting question, and one that I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts about.
Yeah, well, definitely write in at unmistakablecreative.com/contact. Let's review our iTunes reviews, Greg, and then we'll close everything up. Brandon Barnett writes in, says, "You're not alone. Srini knows how to get to the heart of the matter. This podcast celebrates the individual while reminding the listeners that we are not alone. As a Nashville-based songwriter, I can assure you this is not just for bloggers." Well, thank you for that. That is awesome. We're happy to hear that we are getting, people who are songwriters listening to us. That's awesome. And here's another one. Scrappy D. Cody, eminent creative essence. This team is an example of how to rebrand and relaunch successfully. They popped the bubble and created fresh air. New website is awesome. Content is relevant, candid, smart, and brings me back.
Nice.
Well, that's Scrappy D. Cody. I don't know whose name that is.
I really appreciate that, because you know how scary it is to change the brand like that. Oh man, it's unnerving. So it's good to hear that kind of feedback. I appreciate it.
Yeah, especially after 5 years of going in one direction.
Yeah.
Okay, so here is another one by I love this app is the username. Wow, where do I start? Well, for those of you who don't know, Srinivas Rao, the founder of Blogcast FM, while Blogcast FM was an amazing podcast in its own right, focusing mainly on the world of blogging, what it has morphed into with the Unmistakable Creatives is leaps and bounds ahead of its predecessor. Nice. What we have now is a podcast that trumps many others in creativity, but has the same depth, intelligence, and voice that was Blogcast FM.
Wow.
Wow.
What do you say to that? Jeez.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's amazing. Addie K. Martin, who has been one of our longtime listeners, I've been learning so much from the Unmistakable Creative podcast. I've been a devoted listener for about a year and have gained so much insight from the interviews. I feel like I get more from these shows than any other source that I rely on, learning more about growing and being better at what I do. I can see how my thinking approach to work is fundamentally shifting for the better. I'm grateful for the compass. Well, I love that.
Yeah, that's great. I've actually met her in person. She's an awesome person.
That's right. She's in New Orleans. Well, shout out to Addie. Yep. And then Tammy Strobel, who actually was one of our guests before, wrote in, the Unmistakable Creative podcast is the only podcast that I listen to consistently. I love the interviews and stories. Hearing other stories makes me feel less alone, inspired to keep creating. So love those reviews. Cool. You guys are amazing. I mean, that may be some of the most stellar reviews we've received in quite some time.
Yeah, well, I mean, they just keep getting better and better and better. I mean, people are really writing in. People are loving it, and it inspires us to keep going and keep building and keep making it better. Although, I mean, that part I'm sure drives you crazy at times when I'm constantly like, I think we can do better. But these kinds of things inspire us to do better, and hopefully it's paying off.
Yeah, and keep those reviews coming. As we've mentioned to you guys before, they make a huge difference on our ability to find sponsors and also to keep growing the show. The more you write reviews, the more people find out about us, the bigger that we can, get in terms of bringing you guys high-profile guests and really cool and interesting people. So keep those coming, and we'll talk to you guys next Friday.
Thanks for listening in on another candid conversation at the Unmistakable Creative. Embrace your inner misfit. Express your creative voice. And remember, the goal isn't to live forever, but to create something that will.